All right, good morning. Welcome to Harvest Church Sunday School. We'll move into uh, deeper into chapter 7, wrapping that up, and move into chapter 8 of the book of Daniel. Um, just a couple of notes. If you go ahead and pull up uh, second part of Daniel chapter 7. Um, you know, the once again, the first 6 chapters are kind of the life of Daniel, and from beginning to end. And then chapter 7 begins him giving a prophetic vision of the kingdoms to come. And we've talked through the 4 beasts. Remember, the lion with the eagle's wings represented Babylon. The bear with the 3 ribs represented Medo-Persian kingdom, and showing that it had the 3 ribs sticking out that showed that they conquered, three of the 3 kingdoms combined into one. And then the leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads represented Greece and Alexander uh, and his conquest. And of course, he rose to prominence, and then his kingdom was later divided into 4. That's what the 4 wings, 4 heads represent. Then the terrifying beast with iron teeth and 10 horns, representing the Roman Empire and the various kingdoms. Uh, how Rome crushed everything, later morphed into a global and diverse system. And of course, we know that there really was never a conquering of the Roman Empire. Um, many people say that the Roman Empire pretty much self imploded, because there's not been another one since. Of course, the rise of end times, the rejoining when it starts talking about the clay and the different elements, and the fact that one horn, the smaller horn, rises out of that, is in reference to the Antichrist. So that little horn, and that's kind of where we were at. The little horn in verse 20 uh, rises amongst the 10. And it says, I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on his head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes of a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them, until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom. He gave me this explanation. The 4th beast is a 4th kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth. And of course, that's representing the Roman Empire, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. So, what was just described was the traditional Roman Empire. Many believe the 10 horns represent what? See if y'all been paying attention. Modern day. Yeah, but what do we refer to them as? EU, European Union, European Union. Many close. Many many people believe that the 10 horns will represent the reuniting of the Roman Empire, but loosely, meaning there's not one particular person in charge of all of it, like it was at one point under the Roman Empire, but these 10 nations, and it's more than 10. The European Union is more than 10 nations, but that's what it's representing, is it, those 10 kingdoms. And among them, one will arise. After them, another king will arise, but that different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. Uh, Yeah, I think he's one of the 10, but I think it may be. Yeah. Uh, this is the way it was described here, and then in chapter 8, it's described another way. So um, that's why I say it's amongst the 10. And it may remember, don't get caught up in the 10 as much as the union, because the European Union scholars, no one knows for sure, but they say from that is where the Antichrist is going to come from. One of those countries in the European Union. So you can look up, and I don't know the whole list, but it's a pretty vast list of countries in that European Union. And of course, that's why when what you call it stood up and like to the president, people are like, oh, is it Ukraine? I don't know, but you see what I'm saying. But like people were like, oh, because they're like, yeah, he stood up to the United States, the big bully, right? Whatever. But that's what some people were saying. I don't necessarily buy into that, but who knows? I can tell you, I don't know who the Antichrist is, and if anybody tell you they know who it is, run. Now, I think it will become obvious as it gets closer. But for anybody right now to say, "Oh yeah, this is the Antichrist," yeah. Now, I do believe that it's possible that he could be already in the earth, but he could be a baby. He could be 30. I have no idea. And finish. Did I finish 24? I think I did. Yeah, he will subdue 3 kings. Talking about the Antichrist. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his holy people and try to change the set times and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. Anybody know what that means? 3.5 years. Okay. So 7 years of tribulation, 3.5 years, the Antichrist will rule. So, and then at the end of that, go back to verse 22, I think. Until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High. And the time came when they possessed the kingdom. So, who's the Ancient of Days? Jesus, Father God. Okay. I think it's referring to God, God the Father. Of course, Jesus was there in the beginning. Don't get me wrong. But God pronounced the judgment, but Jesus is the executor of it. That makes sense. So, but that's one of those things. God is seen on his throne in verse 22 here. Eternal, pure, just. His throne is the final judgment comes from God the Father. But of course, we know who comes back and sets up his throne for a 1,000-year millennial reign. So while chaos rises from the sea, God reigns from above. So don't get too caught up in it. Go back to verse 13 and 14. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. So you see why I'm saying the Ancient of Days is God the Father. Is when you go back to 13, it references the Son of Man, which is Jesus. You can come on in. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power over all nations and people in every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So go back to 13. One who was like Son of Man coming in the clouds. Jesus, he approached the Ancient of Days, God the Father. Okay? All right. We'll skip to chapter 8. And here, remember, this is the third time we've had, how many prophecies of this happen? How many prophecies of these four kingdoms? 5 technically, and then ultimately the 5th. Remember chapter 2, when Nebuchadnezzar had the prophecy? Remember, he had the statue, right? Each one got down to the 5th one where it was iron and clay, which represented the Roman Empire mixed with clay. That's what iron represented, the Roman Empire. For those who didn't know, it was the 4th kingdom was the Roman Empire. Then it was crushed, and then it came back together with iron and clay, which meaning had some of the legacy of the Roman Empire, but the clay representing not solid, meaning that there's no formal union between the 10 that requires any one of them to be the leader. And thus, that's what leaves way for the, I think, the Antichrist. Because somebody, when you have that many people and that much power, what's going to happen? Somebody's going to what? Someone's going to usurp themselves, exercise, and step up and become the leader of that group. And that's what happens in that. Chapter 7 gives us the 4 beasts. Okay? That's the second time. Then when you get to chapter 8, let's read it again, because this is yet another way of talking about the exact same prophecy. In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision after the one that I had already appeared to me. So he has a vision of the 4 beasts. Now he's having yet another vision. In my vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Susa in the province of Elam. In the vision, I was beside the Ulai Canal. I looked up, and there before me was a ram with 2 horns. And now this is Martin studying it out, that description described the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay, so go back to that. Let me go back. When he's saying he sees himself, the place he sees himself is not the Babylonian kingdom. So he's seeing himself where? In the Medo-Persian kingdom. And we know what happened. The writing on the wall happened under who? Go back to verse 1. Under who? Who was the king? Belshazzar was the king. Remember, in the writing on the wall says that you have been found lacking and wanting, and you have been judged. And then that night, who took over? The Medo-Persians came in under the moat and conquered Babylon, right? Everybody remember that? Clear as mud, right? So now when you're reading it, when is he getting this vision? In the 3rd year of Belshazzar's reign. So he sees himself, even though he's no longer part of Belshazzar's, the kingdom is gone, right? But he is still part of what kingdom? The Medo-Persian kingdom. And remember what, and you're like, what, why does that matter? What happened to most of the lead officials when a kingdom was destroyed? They were killed, right? One kingdom did not take the leadership of the other kingdom and put them in leadership. And so here's Daniel. Remember, the first 6 chapters, guys, is his entire life. All right? And so we've already read that he was there. They brought him in. Hey, if you tell me what this means, I'm going to make you, what, 2nd in charge and 3rd in command, whatever it was. It was 2nd and 3rd. One was 2nd, one was 3rd under Nebuchadnezzar and now under Belshazzar. So now he's having a vision while Belshazzar is still in power. that he is a part of the next kingdom. That makes sense? So that's a prophetic, you don't even think about it, you just read through it, but that's a prophetic portion of the vision as well. When he was having this vision, the kingdom had not been taken from Belshazzar. Belshazzar is fully 100% in charge. And there is no Medo-Persian kingdom. But yet he sees himself in this place, which is part of that kingdom, where that kingdom was located, or that country, that reign, that authority, that monarchy was at that time. Clear as mud? Mud? Next. And then he says, I looked up, and there before me was a ram with two horns standing beside the canal, and the horns were long. One of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. I watched the ram as it charged toward the west and the north and the south. No animal could stand against it, and none could rescue it from its power. So the rams represent the Medo-Persian kingdom, with the higher horn signifying Persia's dominance. Remember, Medo and Persian was two different kingdoms, and one ended up being more powerful than the other. So we know all this based on what? History playing out. When he was prophesying this, he was just saying, I saw two horns, which represented a kingdom. One of them was stronger than the other one, but then the other one took off and became more powerful. And Medo-Persian tells you who was in charge first. Medo, the Medes were in charge first, and then the Persians became the dominant of the two kingdoms. Okay? Clear as mud again. And all of this technically is history, but to me, it helps my faith that someone wrote this hundreds of years before it happened with such great detail, and speaks to this one book alone supernaturally shows you the truth of the Bible and the power of our God to speak. Because he was writing this in 500 BC. And some of this stuff wasn't happening. The Babylonian kingdom was happening right then. Then in his lifetime, the Mede and Persian kingdom happened. But then what he talks about with Greece and Rome was hundreds of years away, several hundred years away. But he was nailing each one of them. Okay? So no beast could stand before him, but he did as he pleased and became great. Let me see where I'm at. Yep. As I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. Now, supposedly there was millions of people in the army of the Medes and the Persians. It was humongous. And the Greek army was relatively small, in the thousands. That's why they call him Alexander the Great, because when he conquered, it was like, and with a much smaller, swifter army. So that the large horn represents Alexander, his swift conquest. But of course, he died. It says, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west, crossing, blah, blah, blah. Keep going, verse 6. It came toward the two-horned ram. So Greece conquered who? The Medes and the Persians. Right? So guess who Greece? I had been seen standing beside the canal and charged it at a great rage. I saw it attack the ram fiercely, striking the ram and shattering its two horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. Okay? The goat became very great, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off. Anybody know what happened to Alexander the Great? He died at like 32. He was really young. At the height of what? His conquering. He died. Okay? And in its place, 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of the heavens. What happened when he died? What happened to Greece when he died? They split it into 4 kingdoms. And then all of this is, you can verify all of this history-wise. The Alexander the Great, you can find it all in history. And the Bible was recording it hundreds of years before it happened. And now history validates it. So, and so they became the four kingdoms. Out of one of them came another horn, which started small, but grew in power to the south and to the east and toward the beautiful land. It grew until it reached the host of heavens, and it threw some of the starry host down to the earth and trampled on them. Y'all got all of that? It set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. It took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. Because of rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. This is the Roman Empire, and part of this is covering when we finally get to the Bible, what was happening in Jerusalem. What was happening with the way the Jewish people were allowed to worship and all that. Who had influence there? The Romans. Who was Jesus turned over to? Yeah. So when you go back and read that, it talks about right up to what? Jerusalem. There's a story that one of the people in the empire of Alexander read this prophecy, and because he realized it wasn't talking about, he stopped instead of conquering Jerusalem. He didn't conquer it. Now that was Greece, not Rome. So, and all that stuff is, you can historically verify it. So, but this 912 is the link to Antiochus Epiphanes, a king who desecrated the temple around 167 BC. So, forbidding sacrifices and setting up. So this is talking about some of the stuff he did, and then it led right up into the what? To the time of Jesus. Okay? I'm not going to go into that part anymore, but I do want you to understand that this is one of the most contested, controversial books in the Bible. Okay? Why? Why do you think the book of Daniel would be, why do you think scholars, not Christian scholars, but scholars, why do you think they fight against the book of Daniel so much? One of the stories, while you're thinking through that, one of the things is they say, it was written after the fact to point back at all of this. And for a long time, they couldn't prove it wrong, because the newest book, the oldest version up until the 40s, was like 900 BC. 900 AD, like in the 900s. That mirrored what the scriptures show in the Bible. So that's why they were saying, that's just that all of this stuff that they're talking about, someone wrote it in hindsight and made Daniel right. But why do you think that's that? Why would you, if you were anti-Christ, anti-Bible, why would you fight against this particular book? Yeah, absolutely, right? History definitely supports what's in Daniel. The question is, was it written before or after? And so I'm gonna, if I don't want the Bible to have validity and supernatural origins in God, I'm gonna fight that the book of Daniel, one of the most prophetic books in the Bible, the most prophetic book in the Bible, the most forward projecting book in the Bible that goes from the time of Daniel. Think about Daniel's prophecy. There's prophecies all throughout the Bible. Daniel's prophecy is from when he was alive till when? Till when it's all over, till the very end. So if Daniel is right, if Daniel was written prophetically, well, how do you argue with the rest of the book? How do you say a God couldn't deliver that, but yet he couldn't make sure everything else was right? And so that's why it's such a fight against the book of Daniel, because it is supernatural. If it is true and written in foresight or prophetically, then it's a supernatural book. Because it was writing things at the time of it was documenting things at the time of its writing, which history proves. There's no question about how the Medes took over the Babylonian kingdom. There's no question about how the Babylonian kingdom, Nebuchadnezzar and all those, how they would bring in people like Daniel and make them learn. All of that is historically proven. So if he also was talking 200 years ahead and 600 years ahead to even describing how the Romans would take over the world and then how it would end, all the way up to 2,000 years later when the European Union would come back together, when we hadn't even got to this, when you look at how Israel comes back together as a country and all of these prophetic things that Daniel wrote, if that dude was right, I got some issues if I'm arguing against the validity of what the Bible teaches. And that's why they fight so much against it. I'll wrap up with this. When you look at the book of Daniel up until the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Dead Sea Scrolls found in the 40s, I think, had manuscripts that went back hundreds of years before before Greece and definitely before Rome. Yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls is and we can talk more about it later. The Dead Sea Scrolls is all of these old manuscripts that are hundreds of years older than in reference back to original writings long before everybody else was saying the original writings were. They were saying, oh, everything's written after the fact. And well, then all of a sudden they found all of these Dead Sea Scrolls and they saw how old they were, and they were older than anyone had testified to the manuscript. Plus, it had some of the Old Testament writings as well. Yeah, but this group had that one. This is not, yeah. This is for today. Thank you for the Bible study word. Pray that it comes alive in us and through us. Help us to understand that if Daniel is true, then we can trust everything else that you had to say. We thank you for your blessings and your provision in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. And